Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root, from CardsWire.com, USA Today NFL Wire site that covers the Arizona Cardinals. And this time, episode 653. This is a little bit different. This show is a solo show. Seth Cox, my co-host from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, will join me in a show later this week as we talk about Arizona Cardinals minicamp. This show, episode 653, is something I will rarely ever do. And this isn't about the Cardinals. It's Cardinals adjacent, because the story isn't about the Cardinals. The story is actually about me and my site, which is a little bit different. As you guys know, if you've been listening for long enough, obviously the podcast has been around since 2013. I've been covering the Cardinals since 2010 and had and just my background. I had media access, beginning in 2012. So my first year that I got to cover the Cardinals behind the scenes, in the press box, in the locker room, practices, draft, and stuff like that. That started in 2012, when the Cardinals went 4-0 to start the year. Kevin Cobb took over for an injured John Skelton, led them to a victory 4-0. Then he got hurt, and then the wheels fell off. They finished 5-11, and then everyone got fired, which led to Bruce Arians since then. So, and that was back in the day when I was not writing for CardsWire, but I was actually the site editor for Revenge of the Birds, which Seth is now the site editor for. He took over for me when I left for CardsWire to start up CardsWire with USA Today's and Sports Media Group in 2016. That said, I had a media credential from 2012. For the first time since 2012, that has changed. The Cardinals revoked basically revoked. It wasn't necessarily personal to me, but they decided to revoke the media access for CardsWire, which involved me and fellow writer Howard Balzer, who has done a few shows, who did a few shows last year, training camp updates and things like that. And I kind of want to tell you about it because it's kind of it does change a little bit the narrative or the way in which I can talk about the Cardinals. And it is a story of, honestly, I would say it's pettiness, because it involves the Cardinals media relations department and Howard Balzer, a reporter who's covered the Cardinals for 50 years, since the days they were in St. Louis. He's a Hall of Fame voter. His career is well documented. He's been doing it a long time. He joined me on CardsWire about a year and a half ago, I think it was. Something around that. He was with Sports Illustrated, moved on to work a little bit with PHNX, one of the other networks around here, and then came to join CardsWire. Very, very glad to have him. He happens to be, both Howard and I are members of the Pro Football Writers of America, the Football Writing Association or Union, whatever you're going to call it. We're members of that, and Howard is the chapter president for the Phoenix Media. But let me give you the back. Let me take you back in time. As I said, I've had media access since 2012, or had media access till 2012, until that changed this offseason. Those of you who are familiar with my work know that this is not my only career, as I myself am a full-time teacher, both at the high school and the community college level. That's the career that I've had since I came out of college in 2001, and I've been doing that for a long time. And I originally started my college career as seeking sports media, and a number of things changed the direction of that, and I decided to focus on education. I teach Spanish. I've done that for a long time. And in 2010, with the online blogging world sort of going through things, lots of people were trying to get online, with guys like Bill Simmons having success. I decided to take a try on that. And through a number of fortunate events and not quitting, I got picked up by SB Nation back then it was the regional Arizona page. It was called SB Nation Arizona Regional Sports Page that covered all the teams locally. And I got picked up to write there. Was getting paid nothing for a little while. In the 2010 season, about halfway through, I was asked to start doing regular Cardinals pieces. And my then editor, Seth Pollock, threw me a few bucks every month, which was kind of nice. I was getting paid something for something I started as a hobby. By the beginning of 2011, the site Revenge of the Birds was going through some issues. The editor of that site was sort of AWOL, and they decided to make a change. And my editor, Seth Pollock, asked me if I would like to do that. I said, absolutely. And so that is when I started handling Cardinals writing, basically full-time, alongside my full-time job as a high school teacher. And I was raised in a family, things like that, but it got me in the door in sports media. And that gave me sort of a little different approach to it. My path to sports media was different. If you read a lot of my stuff early on, it was much different than now. And then for a time, Seth moved on he was carrying basically two torches at the time. He was running the regional sports page for SB Nation Arizona, and he was also the lead editor for NBA for SB Nation. He wanted to focus solely on that, and so relinquished his position as the regional editor, and that's when I took over at the beginning of 2012, I believe it was. And maybe 2011. So there was a time frame in there. And so with that came I was credentialed already. I was covering the Diamondbacks. I was covering Arizona State and things like that. Although I focused Arizona State stuff mostly on the fan perspective. I have season tickets there. That's beside the point. And I was given the opportunity to start covering the Cardinals with media access starting that summer of 2012, which went really well. I was always grateful because one of the things that the Cardinals state about their media policy, that they have approved outlets with full-time workers. And while I was technically the regional site editor, that's not the only thing I did. I've always approached the football job not like a hobby, not like a side hustle. I treated it, especially once I got in the door on the media side, I didn't want to disrespect anyone else in the building. Guys like Kent Summers, Bob McManaman, the guys who do that full time. And that's their one gig, whether they do it in multiple outlets or things like that. I didn't want to diminish their work by treating this like a hobby. And so I knew from the beginning that I was sort of an exception. Like I was the only reporter there that did something else. And I was grateful for that. Covered the Cardinals for years, from 2011 to 2016. And then Cards Wire began. And I was hired away from SB Nation to start the Cards Wire site. And it was a new outlet. I had to go through the process of asking the Cardinals if I could maintain my media credentials. And that was not a problem. We had the same sort of structure, even more so. I had a lead editor at the time, Neil Coulong, who has since moved on to, I think he's at Athlon Sports now. But he recruited me, he got me on, and I got the connection. I continue to have media access since the site's inception in 2016. And that wasn't a problem. It was never a problem for the Cardinals that I was also an educator, as I have been that the entire time. They've known that from the beginning.
Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where licensed therapists dive deep into your favorite movies. From trauma and grief to identity and attachment, we unpack it all through the lens of cinema. Whether you're a mental health professional or just a movie lover, join us every other week for a mix of clinical insight and pop culture fun.
That never came up as an issue. Okay, with that, the Cardinals decided this offseason to end its media relationship with Carswire. And I'd like to tell the story of how that came to be. And it comes with a couple of, honestly, I don't know what it is between the media department, namely Mark Dalton, the senior vice president of media relations, and Howard. Howard's job is the chapter president for the Pro Football Writers of America, as the PFWA chapter president. His job, he's the one who handles Mark and makes the requests and kind of talks about that, because the league has in fact media policies that teams are supposed to adhere to, which tells about the length of practice that should be open, how long the locker room should be open, and things like that. And that is Howard's job, to make sure that the team, that Mark and the team are upholding their end of the bargain when it comes to the media policy. He's the one that requests certain players or coaches, and after talking with the other writers, the ones that you all know, Josh Weinfuss, Bob McManaman, Teo Mack, all those guys that cover the Cardinals here locally, they talk to Howard and they kind of come to things that they would like, and then Howard goes to Mark. There's always been some friction between Howard and Mark for whatever reason. But let me tell you the story about what happened over this season, which led to, it was basically 2, maybe 3 events, 2 disagreements, 1 miscommunication or misunderstanding, and then after that, I don't know. So let me take you back last year. It was Howard, who covers the team, who would cover the team regular in practice, ask questions. He's been doing it a long time. And if you read on Carswire, some of the great coverage that he gets the quotes. He features some of the practice squad guys, as the Cardinals do honor a practice squad or practice player of the week, where they give a Pat Tillman award. He gets to wear the Pat Tillman 40 jersey during the week for being the best scout team practice player the previous week. Howard does one of those. He's heavily involved with Hall of Fame things. He's the one who will present Larry Fitzgerald to the voting committee, which will mean what? It'll be one of those cool things, because it will be a mic drop moment, because the markets that you represent, and he represents the Cardinals and also the Rams, because they used to be in St. Louis, and Howard came here. He lived in St. Louis for a long time, came here a few years ago to continue covering the Cardinals. And one of the things that the reps for the particular teams and markets, when there's a player that comes eligible for the Hall of Fame, he will present his case of why this player deserves to be voted on for the Hall of Fame. He gets to do it for both Aaron Donald and Larry Fitzgerald. And in both cases, he won't have to present anything. He will simply say, I present to you Larry Fitzgerald, and then mic drop, say nothing at all, is how that will go. The same thing will happen with Aaron Donald when that comes. So Howard is well respected nationwide. He is a great guy. I've enjoyed working with him. It's been definitely an addition to the site. But take us back to, it is after training camp is over, before the start of the season. If you remember, Darius Robinson got hurt. Now, one of the things that is a media policy is things that happen after the first 20 minutes of practice that is considered close. We're not to report on that. Okay. What, if you have not heard, when Darius Robinson injured his calf, what some people heard. And what Howard did not report is what was seen on the field that day, that Robinson was carted off the field with an injury, which led to speculation. Well, what happened? But because it happened when it did, nobody could say anything about it. They couldn't tweet about it, and couldn't even ask Jonathan Gannon about it the next day because it happened in the close part of practice. That said, Howard reached out to a contact. He didn't once say, "Hey, Darius Robin went down in practice, was carted off the field." That happened. He did find out that the next day, Robinson was going to have imaging done for a calf injury, and that there was a positive outlook on it. Okay? And this is how we framed it. Howard and I had a conversation about a half an hour of how we should frame this so it doesn't violate the Cardinals media policy. Well, ultimately we came up with, and he sent the tweet. I wrote the story of that Robinson that Darius Robinson, their first round pick a year ago, their second first round pick, was scheduled for imaging for an injury, a calf injury. I can't remember if we specified the injury. That was a calf injury suffered during practice. If you recall, Jonathan Gannon called out that considered a violation of the media policy for the close part of practice. And I will say this, that is simple. Like, I will pound the table for Howard because he did not report what happened in practice. He got other information that said Robinson was scheduled for imaging. The Cardinals would have swept that under the rug completely. And then we wouldn't have known because we would have seen that next morning that Robinson wasn't on the field, and then afterwards could have asked. But Gannon addresses the media before practice, and that would have led to, well, we would have been able to ask it about it. That said, so Gannon wasn't happy that information got out. Mind you, I will say this, that we didn't report what happened in practice. He found out that Robinson was having an MRI done for an injury that he suffered. That opened up a can of worms. Mark Dalton, Howard had a conversation. Mark considered that a violation of the media policy. I disagree. I understand where he's coming from. That's an agree to disagree thing. Howard didn't report what happened in practice, which we're not supposed to do. According to Dalton and the team, what that means being close to practice is that what he saw is off limits for even investigation. I disagree when it comes to journalism. Okay. Now, this could have been, I will say, we could have avoided that first conflict had we waited to post that the next morning. I think it was a Friday. I think the injury happened on a Thursday, and then I think it came on a Friday morning when there was the next practice and Robinson wasn't out there. We could have waited till then. And then, Robinson wasn't at practice. And then, he is scheduled for imaging for an injury. And I think that would have ended any problem. I still don't believe there was a violation of the media policy. I understand what Mark says. I think it's an agree to disagree. That said, what do you do when there is an injury to report, when you can't report the injury? I understand that. So that is what kind of things set things forward. There was no problem for weeks. No problem. Um, Week 1 started. Robinson ended up on injured reserve. He misses the first several weeks. He's designated to return. Now, we know the story about what Darius Robinson happened last year. He had the calf injury. He comes back. He's designated to return, returns to practice, and then is at practice once and then misses practice again and again. And then we know what happened is that his mother died.
Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where licensed therapists dive deep into your favorite movies. From trauma and grief to identity and attachment, we unpack it all through the lens of cinema. Whether you're a mental health professional or just a movie lover, join us every other week for a mix of clinical insight and pop culture fun.
And then he was brought along slowly. So there were a lot of bad things that happened. Gannon said, and this was in a presser during that point of the season, that said Darius had some soreness, which led to them backing off and going back. And so that led to a lot. There were lots of questions. We just wanted to understand. As reporters, we wanted to understand what happened. Was there a setback? Did he come back and then his calf didn't respond well? Did they have him come back knowing it would take longer than the 3 weeks that you get when you're designated to return and then you can be activated? Did they know that? Was it just an unfortunate series of events? Eventually, everything happens and he's activated off injured reserve. It was very interesting that Darius himself, when he spoke to reporters after practice one day, he said that the timeline, and he insisted there was no setback, whatever that means. We do know that Gannon had said that on Darius's first practice back, he suffered some soreness, whether that's a setback, whether that was just being precautionary, that when we're messing around with words. He said that they always knew the timeline. That led to Howard was writing a story based on what Darius said, and he added some commentary to it. Give me a moment to pull that up. This is from the story that came out on November 21st that Howard wrote about Darius Robinson. The good news is that Arizona Cardinals rookie defensive lineman Darius Robinson has had 2 consecutive days of practice this week and finally appears to make his debut sooner rather than later. However, the mystery and shifting narratives during the 3-month saga since Robinson suffered a calf injury on August 22nd could have been avoided if the team had simply gotten ahead of the story and had been consistent while also adhering to the NFL media policy, which mandates that, quote, clubs must ensure that all medical information issued to the media is credible, responsible, and specific in terms that are meaningful to teams, media, and fans. Okay? Unquote. I don't think we can argue that the Cardinals were forthright, specific, and meaningful, and even responsible with the information about Robinson. They would have placed him on IR without telling us what happened. We learned about that. We were with the information got out because of Howard on that disagreement on the media on whether that should have been reported or not. Dalton took great offense at that statement. Now, there is, like when I read you that quote, the media policy does state clubs must ensure that all medical information issued to the media is credible, responsible, and specific in terms of that are meaningful to teams, media, and fans, including the weekly practice reports and in-game updates. That is the kicker right there. When that statement that include the weekly practice reports, injury reports that we get Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then in-game updates. One could argue, if you're playing with words, that the only thing that the teams must be clear and upfront about is what is on those reports and in-game updates. Or you could say that all medical information given must adhere to that policy, and that includes the injury reports and in-game updates. So you can take it one of a couple of ways. And in terms of media information, we understood that as, oh, any information that they give should be meaningful, specific, and responsible. And that also includes injury reports and in-game updates, which, by the way, the league has specific rules for injury reports that is league-wide. That it's not for the media stuff, it's for teams, because if they skirt injury reports or have inaccurate information on injury reports, that they can be punished for that. You can also read that, and where it has the including that it is inclusive of those only. Dalton messaged our senior analyst, Barbieri, friend of the show. She manages the writers on the NFL Wire and also handles Bears Wire. She's been on a couple of preview shows on the opponent's previews shows that we do each offseason when the Cardinals play the Bears, and said that Howard was offensive and reckless by saying that. I'm assuming because he believed that Howard was making an accusation about the injury report, which could lead to league sanctions, which was not the case. That honestly, that is a misunderstanding. That was never intended to be taken that they were misleading on the injury reports. Simply that they weren't being forthright to the media for the information that we give to the general public, that they were being less than forthright about that. And so that led to, if you want to call that, 2 strikes. Okay. That happened in November. In December, Mark Dalton has a conversation with Alyssa, questioning about whether or not the team should handle the hassle. Why should we continue to credential CardsWire? I'd like to point out, of course, that I do not believe either one of those things that Howard did was actually a violation. The first one, agree to disagree. Okay? I can understand where Mark's coming from. I can understand our side. I understand that. There is a misunderstanding on the injury report part, because the whole Robinson thing was funny anyway. We know that. It seemed weird. We just always wanted to understand if they always knew the timeline. So the soreness that Gannon said, was that expected? And did they anticipate him working and then not working, or if it was more of the death of his mother that took back? But Darius was insistent, saying there was no setback. I mean, maybe it was a setback, maybe it wasn't. The fact that he comes back to practice and then doesn't return to practice because he had soreness, that sounds like a setback. They always knew the timeline. So they activated in, so they opened his practice window and knew it would take many more weeks for him to come back. Okay, if that was the case, sure. And it just happened to be that the timing of the death of his mother came in there, and so there's some bereavement to go with that, where he was away from the team, so he missed some practice time, meetings times, and things like that. But it did feel like you're just avoiding the story. And Howard asked questions, and obviously that part of the article angered Mark Dalton. And then there's a couple other things. So this is where I think it goes to the more petty part. Mark fabricated a few things. One of the things that Howard did was around the trade deadline, he requested, because around the trade deadline or after the trade deadline, requested because the writers wanted to see if they could talk to general manager Monty Ossenford. That was declined. And per the media agreement that the next in command, whether it's assistant general manager or director, whatever it is, in this case, Dave Sears. So Howard asked if they could, if Dave Sears would be made available, because he's supposed to be made available twice a year, or at least once a year. I don't remember the policy, but Sears joins Austin Fort for one day of the draft, and it was just a question, and he never heard back. And so Howard did follow, like Mark never responded. There was no response to that. And Howard followed up a couple of weeks later. Nothing crazy, just a simple, hey, did you get back? Mark told Alyssa and then had a conversation with her saying that Howard was harassing him about access.
Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where licensed therapists dive deep into your favorite movies. From trauma and grief to identity and attachment, we unpack it all through the lens of cinema. Whether you're a mental health professional or just a movie lover, join us every other week for a mix of clinical insight and pop culture fun.
And Howard and Mark have had several, which I thought were just professional conversations about little small details to the media policy that the Cardinals weren't necessarily following. Like they were closing practice in less than 20 minutes, or the 45 minutes of locker room access post game was cut down to 30. Like that they weren't following all the details. When assistant coaches are available, things like that. So they just little minor things that Howard has to talk to Mark about as part of his role as the chapter president of the PFWA and holding, the team accountable for being in agreement with the league policy with the media. Okay. And accused Howard of harassing him. It's like, why should we continue to credential with this hassle? And when other teams don't do it. Okay. I will then interject when it comes to this. Why should they continue to credential Cards Wire when other NFL teams don't? Well, for one, Cards Wire has a very unique scenario. Many of the wire sites on USA Today are covered, have their lead editors who do not live in the market. They cover. Alyssa doesn't live in Chicago. Alyssa covers the Bears. We have a few people like that. This is a case where you have two local reporters who cover the team. Howard, who is a 50-year NFL veteran reporter, we don't have that anywhere else on the network, and myself, whom the Cardinals have deemed worthy to credential since 2012. And that they decided that the site was credential worthy in its inception in 2016. Okay. So why should they, if they're going by other teams, it's different. It's different. I get that. But the fact that the Cardinals have in the past consistently since the site's inception had said this is an outlet worthy of it. They have reporters, and there was another part of that. No, it was always just me, so that was no problem. When Howard joined, there was a question. We both were credentialed to cover the preseason opener last year, and then after the Robinson thing, they decided to only have one credential per game. Which, sure, it never made sense why they why they didn't tell us that would be the case in the preseason when they allowed us both there. That's neither here. That's why we think that, this is retaliatory. That it is because of disagreements with Howard or disliking Howard that they decided to do this. And then there's also the thing, and this is a little more personal, because he made the comment to Alyssa. Howard, again, far more years in the business than me. He has done so much more in his career than I will get to, probably. Certainly that I have had in the 15 years that I've covered the team. Mark says the comment to Alyssa. And who is this guy anyway, referring to Howard, that he is working under some high school teacher? That's offensive to both him and to me. I'm not just a high school teacher. I don't just do the Cardinals on the side. I do full-time work with both. And if I were just a high school teacher, like if it was a problem that I taught high school, they've been credentialing me year after year since 2012. So they clearly viewed me as a full-time writer, reporter, worthy of covering the team with media access. And to sort of make a comment like that, and who is this guy anyway, that he works under just some high school teacher? When my peers know that while yes, I am a high school teacher, I'm not just I am a high school teacher. I am a Cardinals writer. I write 180, 220 articles a month about the Cardinals year round. I've been doing that for the last many, many years. I've been covering the Cardinals writing about them since 2010. I've been credentialed since 2012. And ultimately, they decided, now, an important note, the Cardinals would get in trouble if they decided to pull credentials because of a personal vendetta against someone like Howard, or because they disliked what or how they reported something. That is not allowed. The PFW can go in and say, no, this is not right. This is personal. You can't do that. That's against the media policy. The Cardinals then came back, and after the combine, then reached out to Alyssa again, and we believed that we were going to be able to have a conversation with Mark, and personally, I wanted to have a conversation about that, just to clear the air about, well, one, this was a disagreement. I understand where you're coming from, and then to apologize for the misunderstanding because Howard did not intend to imply that the Cardinals were doing anything against league policy in terms of the injury report, just that they were not being forthcoming with information that would have honestly made things so much more clear for fans, for reporters, about the Darius Robinson situation. Said, he came back. It was just real unfortunate. We didn't anticipate him taking this long. He had a setback. No one's judging him. No one's judging the team for that. It was just try to understand the scenario behind that. Anyway, after they came back from the combine, Mark tells Alyssa, is like, we've reevaluated. Now, and there was a point during the season with Howard, there's an email chain that goes between us, and Mark said, we are okay with being one of the only teams that credentials a wire site like Cards Wire. They're comfortable with that, which makes sense. They've been doing it since 2016. After the combine, he said, we've reevaluated after talking to other teams and what they do. We have decided not to credential to end our media relationship with Cards Wire, saying that I could continue to cover the team remotely. Well, like I need the permission to write about what I see and hear. So that's what's different. This is the first year that I didn't get to attend the draft at the team facility, where I was able to ask questions in the building, hear the conference calls, things like that, which was unfortunately, I still can do my job. However, it is very clear that this was something personal, because if it was a problem at any point that I was, quote unquote, just some high school teacher, they shouldn't have credentialed me in the first place. Why should they continue to credential the site? Because they themselves viewed the site as credential worthy since 2016 in its inception, when it began. They didn't have a problem with me and my other job for the last 13 years. It was only a problem when Howard did a couple of things they didn't agree with. And that's the unfortunate thing. At the end of the day, the teams, and this is where, so the teams get to choose what outlets they credential. That's fine. Teams get to do that. That is their right. So there's not a lot of recourse that we have. And the Cardinals made sure to say it that way, in the fact that they were choosing to no longer grant media access to the outlet, rather than Howard can't cover the team, I can't cover the team. Rather than something personal, it's just choosing to not credential the outlet, which is a disappointment. It really is a disappointment. And, this media market, the Phoenix media market, it's not hard hitting. Nobody that covers the team regularly, guys like me, guys like Howard, Donnie Drune at SI, Bo Brock and Johnny Venerable over at PHNX, Dale Mackey, and the guys over at AZ Central, the guys on Arizona Sports. Of course, they're not going to be that hard hitting because they are the flagship for the team. There was a relationship there that of access that they can't say anything inflammatory. The Cardinals reporters in the building who are they're part of their media department, they can't be critical. So there's nothing hard hitting. We basically just want to cover the team, get access to the team, and things like that. So it's very puzzling that what has happened, and it's just disappointing, especially for a guy like Howard who's been doing it for so long and has covered the Cardinals for so long. But yeah, and so I know this is a path off the route that I normally go when it comes to the podcast. The story is always the Cardinals. Okay, Seth and I, when we do the show, we talk about the Cardinals. I don't like to make myself the story. The story isn't in this case me. The story is in this case that Cardware, the site which had media access for 9 seasons, no longer has that access. And I will say that it is because of some personal issues and some pettiness on the team's part, and that's disappointing. Personally, I've been a Cardinals fan since I knew about the Cardinals. I've been following the team since 1989, 1990, when I was a young teenager. So it's tough to come to grips with it. Does that change the way I cover the team? Change the way I see some people in the organization. I still love the Cardinals. I'm still going to cover the Cardinals. Going to yap about the Cardinals here on this show. And I'm still going to write a crap ton of articles about them. And I still want them to succeed. The difference is so I won't have that little bit extra where I'm in the building. I can provide context to questions that were asked. I'm not going to be in the room with the other reporters. I'm not going to be in the press box. I'm not going to be in the locker room. I'm not going to be in the press conference room, and neither were Howard. So that's the only thing that's changed. Can still cover the team plenty well. Seth and I will still yap about this team. And with that, I will wrap up this long discussion about the Cardinals. And that's episode 653. And so this is where you might get a little more insight as I've alluded to this a few times on the other shows, including just had today was the beginning of mini camp. And there are a few players that were going to have a lighter workload this week, according in the words of Jonathan Gannon. They're going to be smart with. They're going to take it easy. One of them, Josh Sweat and Dalvin Tomlinson, 2 players who they added this offseason free agency and weren't seen in any part of the open parts of OTAs in the last couple of weeks. They were named as those guys. They're going to take it easy. They're going to be smart with them. Tomlinson actually spoke to reporters after practice and did not get asked anything about that, whether it was, just easing him in because of his age and experience, or if there was anything that he happened to tweak minor that during workouts, just to give us a little context. Nobody asked that question. That would have been something I would have imagined that Howard would have asked, or I would have asked, but I couldn't be there because I'm not allowed there anymore. So that'll wrap up this edition of the Rise of Zero podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Seth and I will record later this week as we'll do our takeaways about this year's mini camp, and then we will kind of plan things out from there as we're still several weeks away from training camp. When in the shows that we have to come, we'll do our NFC West rankings, and then I will start looking at opponent previews and recording those over the next few weeks before we hit training camp, and then can preview that. So this is the Rise of Secret Podcast, episode 653. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.
Red!